You're listening to Thanks for Making It, a podcast about exceptional creations and collaborations by artists, designers, scientists, and engineers who make things that feel magical. Thanks for Making It is brought to you by the MADE program at RISD and Brown University and your host, Professor Beth Altringer Eagle. Learn more at madecollaborative.org. And as always, thank you for making it.
Well, hi, Jamar. How are
Hello,
you?
Beth. I'm good.
I haven't
It's a
seen
little cold
you.
today, but it's good.
Are you in New York right now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like 50 degrees. I'm like, what?
Yeah, it doesn't look
It looks
cold
warm.
out.
It's
Yeah, it looks
not
warm. How
warm.
deceptive. Yeah. Well, gosh, I mean, a whole pandemic has happened since I've seen you, and you and I used to work together at Piaggio Fast Forward, like some cargo robots. Very different. I'm sure we'll get into that in some way, if that makes sense. But now you're at Samsung, right?
Yes.
And did you go directly from PFF to Samsung?
Yep. And
Cool.
I think the thing to specify is like, I'm not part of Samsung Electronics America. I'm like
Oh, cool.
actually part of like, I'm a subset, like innovation group inside of HQ. So I
Oh,
work
cool.
pretty much directly with Seoul and the
That's
teams
fun.
there. Yeah, my team is like 13 or so people. It's pretty small. Yeah, so that's where I am at right now. And our office is in New York,
Well,
Chelsea.
awesome. Well, let's back up and learn a little bit about you.
Sure.
So, where are you from? Let's start there.
Okay. So, in terms of where I'm from, this is always a tricky question because, well, I grew up in Tokyo, Japan, because I'm half Japanese. So, my dad was in the military, the Air Force. So we did, even though I spent a lot of time in Japan, we did a lot of moving. So we've been to places like Germany, Florida, Texas, Virginia. So did a lot of moving. And then, like, even though I would say like formative years, like middle school, high school, I spent in Florida, I don't want to like age myself, but I've lived in the Northeast longer. So I don't know. I don't think I would call myself Floridian per se, but that's like a quick. I don't even think I answered your question, but I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I just like
That's okay. It's okay.
it's just a
From
lot
many
of places.
places.
From many
I mean, it's
places.
kind of funny that we answer that question generally based on where we were born. And like, you're actually kind of from all of the places you've spent a lot of time. So
Hmm
it is a little artificial that one is like the tag, the data tag.
It's like, does that define me? I'm not sure. I don't know.
Not here. It's just to let people get to know you. So a good like medley is where you're from.
Yes, a medley is a good way
Uh,
to describe it.
and then you were saying a little bit about your role at Samsung. It sounds like it's a global innovation unit that you join. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do, what the unit does?
Sure. So our studio was created back in summer of 2019, so right before the pandemic. And my boss at the time, she was very like ardent about bringing engineering and design together into kind of like this co-creative space. And this concept hadn't been done yet at Samsung, so it was a really big venture. And she wanted it to be in New York, mainly as a cultural capital and just a place where a lot of ideas and people are just mixing. And so I was recruited for that. And the studio serves to pretty much like incubate and create new ideas for mobile. I forgot, let me rewind real quick. We're part of the mobile division. So that
Oh,
involves phones, AR, VR headsets, wearables, hearables,
mhm.
laptops. all that kind of stuff. So all of our projects are based in that sector, and then we kind of incubate these new ideas. We do research, we do design-led projects, and then we kind of just present those to HQ and see which ideas get traction, which seem interesting to them,
Mm.
and then they figure out how they can incorporate it in their product pipeline. Or maybe they just become like overall design principles for them.
Yeah.
So we're like part of the company, but we're also kind of like a consultant. So it's like
Okay.
this really fun space to innovate and not necessarily be too grounded by
Hmm.
like what traditions Samsung runs on in terms of
Hmm.
their design process and things like that. So we have that flexibility. So
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. So what other kinds of people did they, work in this unit? Like, are they all similar backgrounds to you or a little bit different?
no, very different. So very multidisciplinary. So we have researchers, we have creative technologists, and we have designers, and everyone in these fields, they come from a different or like a
Mm.
very specific type of design or specific type of engineering. So we have electrical engineers, furniture designers. For design, we have UX, UI designers, things like that, like sound designers, things like that. So it's a mix of people. And then the way we do projects is it's pretty much our volitions. It's like whatever we want to tackle, whatever we find interesting, we kind of propose these project plans and just start working on them. And then other times, HQ will come to us and be like, hey, we have this thing that we've been cooking. Could we get your eyes on it? So that's kind of like the flexibility and the fluidity that the studio offers. We do our best to like create each small like team project to have like a mixture of like a researcher, a CT, a designer. And that allows us to not only like work with like a small group of people, but also mingle in other groups when projects end and when new ones start and things like that. So there's a lot of flexibility in the process, and we are a very flat organization. So there's not really like a leader that necessarily tells us
Hmm.
what to do. It's more project basis. So whoever's leading the project is kind of like the owner of that project, and it switches and changes quarterly depending on like when
Hmm.
projects end and when new ones start.
Cool. So, I mean, as you know, I'm based at Brown University and the Rhode Island School of Design, or RISD, and I lead our first joint master's degree. It's a Master of Arts in Design Engineering. But you, of course, graduated from RISD. And then maybe tell us a little bit about your career path. How did you decide what to do after graduating from RISD in graphic design, right? What's your field?
Yes.
And then how did you decide, to move to where you are now from there?
Yeah. Oof. Okay, I'm trying to remember because it wasn't too far ago, but it was far enough. I think so. This is also like a question of like design pedagogy too.
Hmm.
So the way RISD is structured compared to other art schools, it's a very theoretical school. So even though you do get like the vocational training of graphic design, and I'm speaking purely for graphic design,
Yeah.
like you understand like how to create books, how to make posters, how to set type and all of that, as well as the theoretical part of like understanding art and its critique of society and the medium, things like that. And so I was in the graduate program. So graduate program is much more theory heavy, whereas undergraduate, I feel, and at the time it was more focused on making and specifically like app design and things like that. So a lot of the undergrad class just naturally transitioned into going to San Francisco for major tech companies like Google, Facebook, Apple, whereas the graduate class would either kind of spin into academia or more museum curatorial work, just by the nature of the type of work that we did. And I started RISD straight out of undergrad. So I didn't really have that understanding of the workspace. I never had a job at that time in design necessarily, so I didn't know the industry. So I was really interested in jumping into tech. I thought it was like a fun space to kind of play and work with. So in my time at RISD, I did an internship in San Francisco at Lit Motors, which was a automotive startup, and
Hmm.
there were like actually a bunch of other RISD people there too, which was kind of cool. And so we were making like cargo scooters, self-balancing vehicles, and I worked on the interfaces for those, and as well as the branding. And I was like, oh, this is so much fun, like actually being able to work on like the product design for
Yeah.
something that someone will actually use. I thought was
Right.
really fascinating. And funny thing is, like in high school, I didn't know that was a career. I didn't know you
Oh,
could
yeah, for sure.
be anything other than like a lawyer, doctor, scientist, writer. Like that in
Yeah.
my mind, like that was it. So entering that space and seeing the possibilities of art and technology, I was like, oh, this is so much like this is so fascinating. It's really fun. So that was like my first engagement with the tech community. And then at graduation at RISD, I got in touch with Jeffrey Schnapp, as you know,
Mhm.
and heard of Piantra Fast Forward as like an innovation startup. And I was like, oh, okay, let's try that. And
Yeah.
I didn't have any, and this might be a privilege of mine. I was just like, there's no, I mean, there might be a risk, but I don't really sense it, or I was like, I don't really
Yeah.
care. So I was
Yeah.
like, let's just do it. Let's just find out what it is. And if we don't like it, we move on. But
Yeah.
I mean, might as well try
Might
it.
as well
So
try. Yeah.
might as well try it. So I thought, yeah, working at PFF was very formative for me,
Hmm.
just being able to develop my own skills that I really hadn't. I mean, I worked on it in grad school, but I didn't really have the time to like
Hmm.
really put into my craft. So the 4 years I spent at PFF was very formative in just like honing and training myself and also being able to explore and just understand what it is to work on a team or in a company. And then from there, got recruited for Samsung.
Hmm.
Also, the the head at that time, or my boss at that time, she was also a RISD grad.
Oh, cool.
Um, I think I forget exactly which. She might have been in industrial design. So yeah, she told me about the whole thing, and I was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's try it again. So once again, just
Yeah.
jumping into a space that I'm not necessarily familiar with, but
So it
it's just
sounds like
interesting to explore.
with Lit Motors, it was kind of like taking a leap from a sort of uh, traditional degree within design, graphic design, into tech, right? And then from Lit Motors, the next leap is like still in products, still in kind of automotive adjacent, but you kind of become you're kind of like the in-house designer. And I know, yeah, of course, we
Mm-hmm.
had some other designers, but like you were sort of doing a lot of a very different design, different areas of design within the company. And so when you say, it let you kind of branch out, I just want to highlight that like it's different than being on a team of lots of designers who are
True,
all
true,
kind
true.
of sharing that, but being kind of the go-to visual and graphic and motion and video designer within a very design heavy company is like kind of bleed into all sorts of different areas. And that's kind of exciting. And then going from there to like the next, is it kind of like design meets strategy? I mean, how would you describe the leap from there to where you are now?
Yeah, the work at Samsung is it's more conceptual, but it's branching or it's bridging both design
Yeah.
strategy and actual like product design because we're forecasting more of where current products can go for Samsung. And so even though we can come up with really cool tech demos and things like that, we have to have some reasoning behind why it is that we want to create this thing and why it makes sense for them. That's the hard part because it's very easy to come up with fun, innovative, like creative ideas that are just like purely for joy and amusement, but not all stakeholders will see the value in that. So knowing what to cut and what to foster is kind of the secret ingredient or the secret skill to kind of perfect. It's also important to take risks too. So with my work, I try to be very like left field, very not necessarily random or unexpected, but try to do something that's, you know, a lot of the designers at HQ wouldn't necessarily do themselves. So taking that risk to show like, oh, look at like how this could be is also really important. So
Nice. So like when you say knowing what to cut is so important, it's kind of like the, Dieter Rams as little design as possible kind of, principle. Yeah, that takes a lot of work to simplify something down to be so elegant, to be just the smallest amount needed.
mhm,
But then that must be balanced with thinking kind of bigger than everyone else, sort of purposefully, because you have the bandwidth to start there. And then the idea is going to narrow down over time. So you have to start really big in order to end up somewhere interesting after all of those cuts and changes are made. So I
for sure.
wonder how you would describe the difference between good and great design.
Great design for me is something here. I'm gonna rewind real quick. Sometimes I think the most useful in terms of like
Mm,
utility, also ease of use, doesn't necessarily equate to great design for me. Like
yeah.
something that's complicated and kind of cumbersome can also be really great in its own mysterious way. So good design is something that is like everyday use. It's kind of there. You don't really notice it, but when you do, you're like, oh yeah, that's a really good design. Whereas
It's
great
like
design,
invisible. Yeah.
it's just invisible. It's
Yeah.
kind of this
Yeah.
a daily
Gotcha.
thing. Whereas
Yeah.
great is like there's some weird nostalgic or emotional attachment to the thing
Yeah.
that we can't really quantify or like really explain
Yeah.
why. It just hits a different way that
Yeah.
I don't know. Like maybe it's a time in our life where it's like this really helped me or this reminds me of X. So that to me is what is great design. And it can be something really like inconsequential, just like really minor. It's just like, oh,
hmm
this is wonderful object.
So, what are some of your favorite examples that embody, great design?
So I look for me, like in terms of, oh yeah, we had the question of like magical or great. I love, love, love musical instruments. I think a lot of creative interfacing with the human body happens in musical instruments and not just like traditional like stringed or pianos or drums. I think those are also great designs that are so common or ubiquitous now that we don't realize how amazing they are. But in terms of like synthesizers and new types of interfacing, I can't remember the name, but there's like this one MIDI controller that is a ring, so you could use hand gesture to create sound, which I think is really magical just to be able to, and it kind of stems from like the theremin, which is all about changing the electromagnetic. I don't know exactly how it works, but like when you put your hand near it, it changes the sound, and the timbre is different depending on proximity to it. So it's moments like that where technology and art meet to like really push expression, which I think is the most delightful thing. I have some props too. So one of my favorite one of my favorite devices is this doohickey. It is a PlayStation Vita. It's a little handheld portable device, gaming device, and it kind of died sadly. I guess it might have been like wrong place, wrong time. The way it was marketed might have been wrong. But one of the things that was really innovative with this thing is like this back panel is a touchscreen. It's not really
Oh, cool.
noticeable, but it has a touchscreen on the
Interesting.
back, so you can like tap it and things like that. And there were some games that required you to
To do
like,
the back part and the front part?
y- yeah, where like
That's
if you
wild.
had a
Yeah.
character on a floor and you had to like hit them up in the air, so you would
hmm
hit the back
Yeah,
of
yeah,
the
yeah.
floor. And
That is so
so
cool.
it was really innovative and very
Yeah.
few games like utilized it, but it was this magical moment of just like, oh, there's something happening in the back. And then the next one, I really love PlayStation stuff, but like this controller, the newest one, a DualSense controller, just like you wouldn't think there could be any more innovation in a controller.
Always
But
can. Yeah,
they always can be, somehow they
yeah.
figure it out. And this mainly it's really inspiring for me just working in like AR, VR stuff and figuring out how haptic and tactility can be further like pushed in terms of just creating a more immersive environment. And this particular controller has like a new generation of haptic feedback that really captures what's happening on screen. So like if your character is walking on like a metallic surface, it has like this like very acute like pinging sensation on the controller. Whereas if you're driving over like gravel, it has like that feel of like rough texture.
Yeah.
It's weird because I was like, okay, like Rumble, like we've had Rumble since the 90s, like we know
Yeah.
what that feels like. So to have something that was actually new or just like a new way of telling that story through
Yeah.
tactility and vibration, I thought was like, wow, that's magical.
Yeah. I remember like there are a couple of things that so your first example of the gestural control, I just saw this the other day. A guy was taking, we were on a holiday for spring break, and this guy took a selfie with a gesture. I'm not sure what phone it was, but it's a different, as far as I know, I don't have that on mine. But it was like, I mean, why has it taken so long? It's so obvious that you would do that instead of the like complicated double button, you know. I was just like such an elegant solution that he could just go like up
Just be like,
on it.
hey.
Yeah. Anyway, and then I remember the first time I experienced that rumble. Do you remember in malls they used to have this like it was
Like an
like a
arcade?
little it was like a vehicle that you would go
Yes.
into and you'd watch like a little mini movie. Do you remember? And like you
I think
strapped
I,
in and you're like
and it's like,
yeah, it
like
was
the
like a
original 4D
tiny
experience.
yeah. And I was like, that was I mean, in terms of magical, I was like, what I can feel this. I can
Mhm.
feel the pictures basically. It was cool. That was a long time ago. Fun. So if we think of other examples, we can chat about those as they come up. So we talked a little bit about design and engineering, how like to create these kinds of magical experiences, often you really need the best of both skills to come together, you know, in that product category so that it's a seamless, fully integrated experience. And so I just wonder, you know, in general, how you see that kind of emergent, I don't know if field is the right thing to call it, but there's like a growing space between the disciplines where there's more interactivity and there's more importance perhaps to get it right in a business.
Definitely. And I think like when we were talking about this before, I just think like the power of Apple and branding and things like that, it's really noticeable in the rest of the industry in terms of just like you have to really present things in a way that makes it feel luxurious or special
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
just like the sensibility is there. And I think now a lot of companies are seeing the benefit of design. And so
Hmm.
probably their initial reaction is we just need to hire designers.
Yeah.
I don't think that's I also like that's not
Yeah.
the solution either. It's more like how do you integrate design
Yeah.
in the core competency of the business where you think not only just aesthetically, but also, you know, empathetically for the people that are using these products. Like, how do you want them to feel on an emotional level? And how do you make that a principle that is then distributed on every facet
Yeah.
of creation for whatever product that you're making? So to me, companies that create divisions that are able to do that, I think will be the most successful.
Yeah.
But I do think any company that does hire design or wants to get more consultation, that's always a good thing too.
Yeah.
Um, it's like, but for at least for Samsung, like Hyun, who is our head at the time, she knew the value of bringing these two, like engineering and design together to create like kind of like a beacon or like a lighthouse for the rest of the company. Because a lot of times it's when we see the product on the shelf, we don't realize like how much labor and toil goes into these things. And for a lot of companies that are, I don't know, like who can't necessarily expand their innovation or research divisions specifically for design, they don't have the time or the bandwidth to have personnel be dedicated to understanding how to critically think about what comes next. So when we kind of like interface with HQ, like a lot of times they're strapped on pumping out what has to come out in like 6 months' time.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they don't have the time to really think enough for future products. So that's kind of like where we step in to help out any type of like assistance that we could do to be like, hey, this is like we notice these trends, these signals that are happening of user behavior, and we're applying it to your devices. Like this is how we think we could help in creating that new trajectory for product design. So companies that can figure that out and hire the right people, I think will be really successful. But I think that's kind of where the industry is going. And I know every company has a different method of doing this. If you are a designer, I think your skill set can be applied, especially if you think critically about just people in general. That's really all it is, just like how you think about people. You can be a really good asset for these companies in terms of how you think about this space.
Yeah. I was just thinking, like, one of the things you were saying is so yes, it seems like every company does this a little
Mhm.
differently, and even within a company, it changes over time. But one thing that I think is interesting that I've heard elsewhere as well is like you almost divide by time. So you have some people who are at that intersection, within the 6 months to launch horizon. And then you have
Mhm.
some people like embedded in the teams, where design and engineering are particularly connected. And then you also have this like kind of far out sort of 5+ year horizon team, and that they're then, kind of sharing information on at key points that can influence one another's trajectory. One of the things that I've seen though in that pattern that's a little challenging is like a lot of people don't really like to inherit ideas that came from other parts of an organization. And so it can
Mhm.
be a little challenging to say, here's what we think that you should be doing, 6 months from now. Like, what are your thoughts on the best way for that to work versus
Ooh.
get kind of sidelined?
That might be more of a cultural thing.
Yeah.
I think maybe that's just my speculation. Like that might be a more American idea, but at
Interesting.
least
Yeah.
in Samsung, they're very like hungry for what we
Yeah.
can offer, like what our
Oh, that's
thoughts
great.
are. So it's very nice. I'm like, oh, I feel appreciated.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean,
Uh,
you've experienced some other companies, so do you kind of know what I'm talking about? Sometimes there's a reluctance.
yeah, because in their mind, they already decided what they want to do.
Yeah, yeah,
So
exactly.
it's
And you're
like,
kind of changing course for them.
yeah, it's like, oh, here's an opposite idea. And I just think,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
honestly, like, not to be political at all,
Yeah,
but I do think it's like that might just be like an archetype, like a very male dominant archetype that's like, we're going to do this. This
yeah.
is a game plan. This is how we're going to tackle it.
Mhm.
And not necessarily thinking about the broader implications of
Yeah.
what this design means, or just like, what are we even making? It's like
Yeah.
always a good question to
Yeah.
ask. And just what about it is important or
Yeah.
valuable? So I think it really depends. And with Samsung, it's such a big company. Like there's thousands and thousands of teams. I've only interfaced with 20 or so people from
Mhm.
HQ, and that's just
Yeah.
like a tiny subset. So with companies this big, like there's so many people pulling it in different directions that you do need some direction from like whatever space you're in, you do need
Yeah.
some type of guidance. So I think that's kind of why they look to our team for help in innovation, specifically for mobile. So hopefully that answers your question. But I think it's the
Yeah, yeah,
scale. It's the scale and the
yeah,
culture that really dictate like whose opinions get heard or whose opinions are valued and things like that.
yeah. And what kind of, evidence needs to back them up. So is there, I guess I have a couple questions, but maybe one, one at a time. So is there a particular product that you think is a great example of like a design or feature coming together that represents that kind of magical potential when that's done really, really well? This could be at Samsung or it could be elsewhere if you want.
Ooh, yeah, because that's like everything's secret that I work on. I can't
Yeah,
say
and
anything
it's okay.
particular.
You can skip the question too if something doesn't come to mind.
I think so for PFF at least,
Hmm.
since the product is out in the open, I thought the most joyful thing for me in that experience was like when we brought Jita the robot out in the public and let people play with the robot and like see how it moves and follows them. There was a lot of like like immediate
Yeah,
reactions that you could
yeah,
just see. And I thought, ooh, that's a wonderful
yeah.
moment to capture and to feel like, oh, I was part of this product of,
Hmm.
or like I had a hand in creating some design for this and people are reacting to it very positively. Like that
Yeah.
felt really good. And so I think that merge design and engineering where it's like
Hmm.
design wants one thing, engineering says we have to do it one way,
Yeah.
and meeting like the middle ground of compromise and also acceptance, but eventually to a either an interface or a product that makes people happy is kind of like the thing I strive for, or at least
Yeah.
seek in the work that I do. I hope that answered your question. I'm not,
Yeah. No,
I now
like
like now I think about it.
I
Kind of
remember, I remember those moments too, those kind of early moments when we took Cheetah out for the first times in public. And it was like wonder. I mean, people would be like, it was like magic. And then later they're kind of figuring out, well, how would this fit into my life? But the initial reaction was like, wow, like what is that thing? And
hmm
that was really cool, especially kids, right? It's just be like, what? uh,
Yeah, it
and
was because
that was really cool.
it's like what do you expect to find at Disneyland, but now you're just seeing
Yeah.
it on the street like randomly. You're not expecting it.
Yeah. And there aren't a lot of, the team took a lot of risks with that design. There aren't a
hmm
lot of teams that are willing to do that, right? To go that far out and
True.
make from the form factor of it's a spherical rolling robot. So it's like both a wheel and like a carrier, right? And then the insistence on being a one touch operation of like the simplest possible interaction for the user. Like those were actually pretty bold design decisions that I don't know. I guess it's an open question. Like, can you get that sense of wonder without being a little out there?
Yeah, you do need the spectacle, I
Yeah, there's a
feel,
spectacle.
for it to be truly magical. But I think it can happen in sometimes the most banal ways too, like
Yeah.
the mouse being a magical object when it first
Yeah.
appeared. Like, I don't know, like I feel that like design, like it really depends on how it's presented and like the narrative that you want to craft with it. I'm thinking of like some of like the Japanese industrial designs, like that
Mhm.
one, I forget the designer's name, but it's a CD player that's wall mounted. And just the thought of like, okay, having a CD player wall mounted and being able to see the disc spin and like
Yeah.
the new type of art that it creates, the visual that it creates
Yeah.
from the graphic spinning is like, that's magical. And like, that's a really nice design.
Yeah. And
um,
taking something that everybody else is hiding and
and
celebrating it.
exposing
It's
it.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder, as we talk about, the types of ways that you work internally, as well as some of the types of products that you really you know, appreciate the seamless integration of design and engineering. I wonder, like, if you could wave a magic wand and and influence the way that the next generation is educated, particularly
Mm.
at that intersection of design and engineering, what would be kind of your wish list of what these students would be graduating with?
Definitely a sense of self through play. In terms of just like seeing like other students and some of the students that I've taught, I feel like the most successful ones are the ones who aren't concerned with what their teachers think like of their work or how their
Yeah,
teachers will kind of view their work, and the ones who are willing to question, the
mm,
assignment or like what it is that we're even doing. That to me is the most important. Not, I guess not necessarily skill set, but just
yeah,
being a decent human being, like being able to
yeah,
understand and not just take what's given to you and just be fine with
yeah,
it, being like, oh, I really want to understand like why it is this way. But also being playful about it, like being not
yeah,
too serious. Because I think sometimes when we are too serious, then it kind of like drains the energy of
yeah.
what it is that we're making. And so we miss out on this opportunity to really create either social engagement or just social play that I find, at least for me, is the most exciting part about designing.
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing that happens when people are too serious about their work, because I advise a lot of different people. It makes it a lot harder for people to give you feedback, like honest feedback. If you are very obviously very serious about it, like you know what I mean? Because then it's like it's gonna hurt you somehow. Where if you're being playful, you're also flexible, right? About how, although that'd be a little bit funny to see a child super serious about life. I'm just like,
It's
no.
like, what? That defeats the purpose.
But yeah, generally playfulness involves like imagination and some flexibility.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I think there's another benefit in that you'll get more frequent and more honest feedback from people if you can, be playful about your ideas. And then the second thing I heard you say was about, students who have don't take for granted kind of what they're taught. And that's not exactly it. It's more like you said it in the sense of who challenge their teachers, but then at a different point you said it's the students who ask why you're doing something. And I hear those as kind of two different ideas, right? One is you can be challenging without being genuinely curious, right? It's challenging for the sake of it. And
For the
I
sake of
don't
challenge.
know if that's that valuable, but if it's you're asking in order to understand why you would do it this way and also understand the boundaries of where you might not do it that way. Is that which I just
It's more the latter. It's more the
okay,
latter
all right.
because I think for anything, there's multiple ways to do it. So not being restricted, be like, okay, there's a priori data like of all these people doing it a certain way that seems to
Yeah.
work. Like,
Yeah.
should I also do it that way? And it's like, no, figure out why it worked for them, and then how
Mhm.
does it work for you? And that this is more like when we think about like style and self-expression and like
Mm.
how we treat graphical imagery and things like that. Like it's easy to fall into trends or want to mimic or be trendy essentially in our
Mm-hmm.
design. So it's like understanding like, okay, why is that trendy? Or like, why is this behavior occurring? And what is my opinion about it? Essentially, is like I
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
hear what people have to say about it as opposed to just a regurgitation of
Yeah.
what
So
you're
it's like
taught or what you.
having, sorry. So it's
Oh
like
no, go ahead, go
having your own
ahead.
point of view, right? And
Hmm.
as a designer and being able to articulate other people's point of view and kind of differentiate yours from theirs. Is that
Yeah. It's like what
what you
makes
mean?
you you? Like
Yeah.
what are you interested in? That's
Yeah.
I think one of the most important things to learn at a young age because it's like
Hmm.
and I think the younger generation now is much more sensitive to that
Yeah.
of being expressing who they are. So I think it's in the right direction, and I kind of just want to see more of that. But I'm always curious of
Yeah.
like the students who are like more reserved or more cautious with
Hmm.
how they want to express themselves. I'm just like, oh, what like what's going on here? I'm curious, like
Yeah.
what is this?
Yeah, it is. It's kind of common amongst designers to be sort of shy and sometimes really thoughtful, but not very
Hmm.
vocal. And we were just having a conversation in the program about this, where there's some students who in a journal form are really, really thoughtful.
Hmm.
Yeah, probably in some ways the most talented in terms of, there's the making stuff that you can see, but then also it's the quality of thought and
Hmm.
reflection that they bring to their work, where they're exceptionally talented, but they say very little, And so it's like,
Hmm.
well, it exists here and it's really important. How do you bring that out? Or maybe if that's not even the right question, right?
I think
Maybe
it's
just let
okay.
them be the way they
Yeah.
are, and organizationally develop the ability to learn from that, from their favored reflection.
Exactly. To me, that's the system's
It's been
fault,
really
not the
common. Yeah,
student.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. There's a
Like
lot of work
creative
to do, I think,
assignment.
in
Yeah.
destigmatizing being quiet. Let's see. So I think we could probably move to takeaways if you feel good about that. And I'll ask you a couple of different takeaway questions. So one is any advice that you have for people who are on the job market looking for design and engineering integration roles. And the other is your advice for leaders who are hoping to get better at design and engineering integration for their business.
For the first one, ooh, I think sometimes when we compare ourselves to others around us, we think that's like, oh, I have to get like that amazing
Yeah.
job first. I have to get like
Yeah.
that superstar status.
Yeah.
Like I want a big paycheck. Like I want people to know that I'm doing well.
Yeah.
um, and I think if you are able to land that, kudos to you. But for those who don't get that opportunity, it's still not the end of the world, but it might just be a slightly different, maybe tougher road where you have just have to start smaller. Like you might have to start either at a startup or just maybe it might be a company that's not really doing the most innovative or exciting work, but at least gives you a place to kind of like think about like what type of work you want to do. It might give you the time to do side projects and things like that to then hopefully elevate. At the same time, it is who you know. Like,
Yeah.
as talented as you are, at the end of the day, it's who you know.
Yeah.
So, getting in touch with the right, it's not necessarily being like a socialite or anything, but just like, especially with social media, like, it might be tagging work with
Hmm.
someone that can, maybe it goes to another person that sees it. There's a lot of like moments of serendipity that can happen with social media that I think if you have a strong internet presence, that's
Hmm.
probably in this day and age the best way to really have like complete agency over your
Yeah.
career.
Yeah. That's a
Um,
great tip.
so I wouldn't say it's necessarily being an influencer or being mega popular online. Like if you
Hmm.
can also achieve that, like by all means, and you like doing that, like
Yeah.
please do that. Like that's amazing. but it's more like having a strong online presence. So
Hmm.
if anyone needs to find you, they can easily find your work. They can easily see what you've been up to, things like that, in order to, progress where you want to go. And then the other thing is there are a lot of grants. Like there's oddly enough a lot of money that is given out, whether it's at a startup incubator or like privately funded ventures and things like that. Like there's money out there for people. It's just a matter of like, are you willing to create the business plan? Are you willing
Yeah.
to maybe not eat well for a year or so? Like there's
Yeah.
gives and takes, and there's hardships, and then there's rewards. So
Yeah.
especially in America, it can be quite competitive. It can be quite like rough out here. um, but at the same time, if you're also willing to travel, like
Yeah.
there's always things overseas, especially in Europe, where like residency programs and things like that, where you could be, you know, well fed and be able to do the work that you want to do. So
Yeah.
it really depends on your personality and what you're able to put up with, and what you're willing to sacrifice to hopefully
Hmm.
have something later on. But
Yeah. I think that's really good advice. And I mean, this is a little side thing that I love. I think I follow your poster Instagram.
oh yeah.
So I love that you have, there's like Jamar's regular work that lives over
Mhm.
here, and that there's Jamar's like, I don't know if it's daily, but it's like
Random.
it's really, it's like pretty frequent, or at least I don't know if it still is, but like a new poster just for stretching yourself and showing that side of yourself. And I think you used to keep them separate, but now they point to each other or something.
Yeah, well, weirdly enough, like a lot of my job now is to be very playful
Yeah.
and to be very expressive. So
Hmm.
I feel like I used to not be that way, like kept them very separate. But then
Yeah.
I got to the point where I'm like, but why? Like, what does it
Why?
matter?
I know. I know. I know.
Like, it really doesn't matter.
It
So,
doesn't
but
matter. In fact, it's quite beautiful,
yeah,
Yeah.
but I think I also keep it separate mainly because I want to keep the page clean and just
Yeah.
like it's just art. Like that's all
Yeah.
that is here. It's not like what I'm eating. It's not what I bought. It's none of that. It's just art. But I think the more we can bring ourselves into our work, or maybe like I think this is another question of like digital personality versus real personality. Like
Hmm.
for some people, these are very different. The digital might be more freeing, it might be more expressive, might be more you,
Yeah.
whereas like your real life personality might be very in
Super
terms of
button up.
the environment that you're in.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a certain
Yeah.
environment that you're in, you have to close that off. So I think
Hmm.
for any job situation, like if you can find an environment that welcomes who you are and doesn't stigmatize that, or at least doesn't shun that, like that's a healthy place to be. And if you can be your authentic self and be comfortable there, then I think that's a good place for whatever amount of time that you're there to
Yeah.
work. For the second question, in terms of, you have to kind of repeat it for me because you're
So
saying,
this was advice for leaders who, they recognize that maybe their project or their product it's good, but it's not great, right? Like, and it's either, very utility focused, functional engineering focused, or maybe overcorrecting on the aesthetic side, but maybe lacking that full integration. Any advice that you would have for improving that in their company?
in any case, I think diversity in skill set and in people will really do wonders for it. But the caveat is that you can't just grab random people. Like, you really can't. Like, just like having a quota or whatever is not going to cut it. So
Yeah.
it's really understanding, like, does this person vibe with what it is that you're trying to make? Is their attitude like appropriate for the project? Is their ego appropriate for the project? Like, can you be transparent with them? I think like settling that with each person and how you recruit people is really important because I think a lot of times we just want to be like, I need to get like the best talent for this project. And usually it actually might not be suited in terms of just efficiency and
Hmm.
getting something out the door. It really might not work.
Yeah.
So it's not really looking at a resume per se, although it is important. But like most of the times in an interview, if you ask the right questions and you get to understand that person well, I think by the end of it, you could have some type of trust with them. And then you can figure out like, okay, I think this person could be a really good addition to this project. So for me, I think it's the interview process. Like as a recruiter or as like a leader in this project, are you even familiar with the project and how it scopes and where it can
Yeah.
go and the type of questions or the type of talent that you need to even achieve that? And sometimes you might have the right people already on your team. You just need better supporters or people who can like really bring out the potential in people that are already on your team. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like dating. It's like you have to really get to know this person
Yeah.
in like that 30 minutes or an hour that you have. And I also think like taking a risk is better. Like getting someone that you're not necessarily like, it doesn't really fit the type of persona, the type of person that you normally would look for this position. Like just take a risk and see how it works. But I think, yeah, figuring out the questionnaire. How does this person like to work with other people? How do they like to take direction? Are they the type of person to initiate ideation? Are they the type of person who waits for an idea to come and then react to it? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's an interview process question.
And maybe some organizational processes.
Yes.
Well, Timur, thank you so much for joining me. And this has been a great conversation.
Thanks for Making It is brought to you by the MADE program at RISD and Brown University and your host, Professor Beth Altringer Eagle. Learn more at madecollaborative.org. And as always, thank you for making it.